I'm really excited today to introduce Melissa Hauber Ozewr, who's overseas like I am. But Melissa, it's so nice to have you here, and I'm really excited for me and also the rest of our members to get to know you better. So tell us about yourself and your work with refugees, and also what brought you to Refugee Concerns Interest Section.
Well, it's great to be here, and I'm excited to hear about other Refugee Concerns members. I've met several at conferences, but unfortunately we haven't been able to connect in person the last couple of years, so this will have to do. So my background is in adult education. I started out teaching in community contexts in Philadelphia, my home city. Actually, before that, I started as a classroom aide for World Relief in the Chicago area while I was a college student. And so that eventually brought me back into teaching adults, many of them from a refugee background, as well as other immigrants in the Philadelphia area. And then I also expanded into more formal contexts. So I was teaching international students at the University of Pennsylvania and a couple other universities over the years. So for the past 15 years or so, I've always spanned formal and non-formal education. And that's taken me into kind of parallel paths throughout my career. Yeah, so I ended up moving to the DC area, Washington, DC area, for my PhD in international education at George Mason University. And my husband was also studying there. When he finished his degree, we moved to Turkey, to Iskenderun, which is in the southern part of Turkey on the Mediterranean, for his job. He's also an academic. So it was a good opportunity for me to kind of get some firsthand experience as an adult immigrant and language learner. So I finished my PhD coursework from here and then did my research. And my dissertation research was with Syrian refugees who are university students in Turkey. So in that way, I was able to kind of bring together my two parallel interests to look at the experiences. I'm especially interested in interrupted education, as I know many of our fellow Refugee Concerns members are, because that's a common experience of refugees. So I was interested in how these youth who came to Turkey due to the civil war right across the border in Syria, we're about 100 kilometers from the Syrian border here, how they navigated that experience of displacement and interrupted education in high school, and then how they ended up getting into the higher education system in Turkey, which is not typically very easy to navigate even for native-born students. So in that research, I looked at the investment strategies. I used Bonnie Norton's investment theory and identity as part of her identity framework, which really helped me to see not just language learning, but also the kind of the social and cultural adaptation that they went through. And there's not one story or one trajectory that these students kind of followed. Each path is very different. So that was a really, really interesting experience. And I could see parallels with my own experiences too as an adult immigrant. And so I'm really interested in continuing that line of research and looking at how refugees follow different pathways to move towards their short-term or long-term goals. Language learning is a big piece of that, but it's not the whole story, as I think many of our colleagues would agree. I stumbled on Jesuit Worldwide Learning through my networks in the refugee world. And so they offer, I guess it could be considered non-formal, but they offer educational opportunities to refugees, displaced people, and other marginalized groups in partnership with local community centers. Some of them are run by JWL or Jesuit Refugee Services, which is kind of a sister organization, or other local branches of these international organizations. And then the classes are accredited through universities in various countries. Many of them are Jesuit universities, but there's a big network across the world that I got to kind of enter into in this program. So I'm teaching the Learning Facilitator Professional Certificate course, the online portion. So students meet in community centers around the world. For example, we have students in Kakuma camp in Malawi. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty right now about what's happening with that camp. Kakuma is in Kenya. Then we have Dziliga in Malawi. So those camps are both kind of up in the air right now. We're keeping a close eye on what's happening there. And then we have students in Sri Lanka who, of course, have experienced decades of conflict. We had students in Myanmar the last session, but this semester it's not possible because of the government crackdowns. And then where else? Afghanistan, several centers in Afghanistan, which of course is a place where many have had interrupted education due to the civil war, as well as disruption in their everyday lives. And then we have some students in India and Guyana, and many different places in rural areas as well. So I think that's a really wonderful model because it's offering something that's not accessible in the local community, but through these partnerships, we're able to offer this learning facilitator certificate, which helps them to then obtain employment usually in NGO settings. It's not a teaching certificate per se, but we provide a lot of background on student-centered instruction, culturally relevant instruction, and things like that. All based in their local community context, and they're able to apply it to their own communities. There is also a Peace Leader certificate, which is really interesting, especially for these communities that have experienced conflict. There's a diploma program, and it's growing, so it's exciting to see what kinds of opportunities will be available.
Right, yeah, and I've volunteered for JWL in a sort of tutor capacity with there are undergraduate students who need help with English, and I know that they are extremely supportive of 18-year-olds and older who want to go on for either higher education or to look for certificate programs. And you would think that with so many refugees in the world, that would be something that would be more available, but it's really not. So they're really filling a niche, and we hope more step in for that.
Also teaching online for George Mason University. The one benefit of COVID is the expanded opportunities for online teaching. So I'm teaching action research for teacher candidates there in Northern Virginia, which is fun. And then I'm hoping to get into a faculty role eventually. But I've always been, as long as I've been involved in TESOL, I've been in RCIS because that's really where my primary interests are, even though I've worked with students from many different settings, including very privileged students in Ivy League universities. So I find that this group is really a wonderful source of knowledge and ideas and moral support in this difficult sector, especially as the number of refugees has skyrocketed over the last decade or so. So I feel like it's my home at TESOL.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned your research. What if you could just briefly sort of tell us about what were your results or what were your findings? You said each person had a different story, but were there any common themes that you found?
The big theme, which I expected but didn't specifically target in the study because I wanted to see what kind of came out of the data, was that language learning is crucial but difficult to actually accomplish in many cases. Here in Turkey, as I have experienced myself, the methods of teaching Turkish as a second language are a little more traditional, we can say. And the courses are not necessarily geared toward the students' needs and goals. So you can find in the non-formal system, there are community centers, I guess, municipal centers that offer Turkish courses, but those are usually just at the A1 A2, maybe B1 level, which, as we all know, is not sufficient for academic study or even work.
Sure.
And then there are lots of classes that have been started by NGOs and other organizations for Syrian refugee population. We have at least 4 million, including 3.6 million who are registered with the Turkish government, and then many who are not registered, as well as refugees from other places too. So there are many offerings for language learning, but they're not necessarily using the methods that are necessary for real proficiency. And then the other issue is that the higher levels are difficult to find. You kind of have to do it yourself, which is what I did and what many of my participants did. They took the classes as far as they could, or they attended a more formal program, which is through the universities. University-based centers around the country offer the Tömer system, which is more geared toward academics, but it doesn't quite get to that level. Some of our colleagues who are involved in IEPs or academic English would know that getting to that level, that B2 or maybe C1 level, is quite difficult. But then you still need the subject-specific vocabulary and communicative skills, as well as reading and writing. And so my participants entered university based on this is the other issue, that the entry requirements are not consistent or not consistently applied. So some of them entered university after taking a proficiency exam, which was far too easy, I guess. So they told me these stories about sitting in their first university classes or the first semester and just not understanding anything.
Wow.
And then they followed this really interesting pattern where they had this kind of period of struggle as they tried to adapt to the linguistic and cultural environment of the university. In some cases, they experienced overt discrimination from other students or from faculty members even, or from community members. Sometimes the university was kind of an oasis where people were a little more open-minded. And then as they use their own investment strategies, to use Bonnie Norton's framework, they use Turkish media. They watch shows, movies, they listen to music, they sought out friendships with local students, they volunteered, they taught Turkish once they got to a certain level to help other students. And so they kind of overcame this barrier, and then they were able to participate more fully in the campus life and the academic process. And some of my participants were not quite there yet. As a result of these experiences, depending on the types of social environments, some of them ended up, well, it's not the end, but they, at the time that I would talk to them about a year ago, they felt some kind of belonging in Turkey, kind of an identification because of relationships that they had formed through their education, or because of perceived cultural or religious similarities. There were also some who felt that Turkey was kind of Syria, but better, which was really interesting.
That's interesting,
the culture is similar, the food is similar, the language has a lot of shared vocabulary, and the grammar is totally different, but it was interesting to see how they kind of identified with these different aspects in order to feel like a part of Turkish society or not. So some of them, especially those who had maybe a more difficult adaptation process, expressed this longing to return to Syria when the war ends, or if the war ends. Many of them put it that way. Some of them had dreams of continued migration to Europe or to the US or to Canada, because they understood, or they perceived that their options were limited in Turkey. That's a big problem here, which doesn't happen with resettlement contexts usually, that in asylum settings, there are a lot of limits on what what refugees are able to do. So they might be able to access education either through the formal national system, which is the case now in Turkey, but it wasn't in the beginning. Or they might need to go into a parallel system of non-formal education or these kind of community schools established for refugees. But then there's the problem of transitioning into the workforce, which in Turkey is possible but difficult.
That's so interesting. Well, this has been fantastic. I am so excited. We chatted beforehand, before we started recording, that I was really excited to get to know you better. And I certainly feel like I do. And I think our members will also. All of what you spoke about is so interesting. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thank you. And I hope to see everyone next year in Pittsburgh.